Every empire has its god. Rome had Jupiter, Egypt had Ra. And America, yeah, it's got its G.O.D. Guns, oil, drugs. Not the God you pray to on Sunday, the one that actually runs things Monday through Saturday. The one that keeps the wealthy wealthy, keeps the powerful powerful, and keeps everybody else exactly where they need everybody else to be. Let me walk you through all three, in order, with receipts. Because once you see the architecture, you'll understand how the structure has been built. Let's start with the one that gets the most noise and the least truth. Guns. Now, I believe in the Second Amendment. Let me be clear about that. The right to bear arms is in the Constitution, and it's there for a reason. The founders were specific, and armed citizenry is the last check against a tyrannical government. But here's the question nobody in the mainstream wants to answer. Whose Second Amendment is it? Because the history of American gun policy doesn't tell the story of a consistent principled defense of the right to bear arms. It tells the story of a right that gets loudly defended when it serves the power structure and quietly eliminated when it threatens it. 1967, Oakland, California. The Black Panther Party begins conducting open carry patrols in black neighborhoods, legally within California law, to monitor and document police conduct. Armed citizens observing law enforcement, exactly what the Second Amendment describes. Within months, Ronald Reagan, then governor of California, signed the Mulford Act, eliminated open carry in the state. The NRA, which today positions itself as the uncompromising guardian of gun rights, supported the bill. The guns were fine. The guns in those hands were not. Fast forward to the 1980s. Crack cocaine flooding urban communities. And it didn't come alone. Firearms followed the product at a volume that no street-level network could source independently. Gary Webb documented it. The Kerry Committee investigated it. The CIA's own Inspector General confirmed in 1998 that the agency had awareness of narco trafficking by the Contra networks it was funding, and chose to look away. Guns and drugs delivered together into communities that were already under economic siege. You want to know what that produces? Not organized resistance. Organized resistance requires stability, communication, and trust. What it produces is chaos, neighbor against neighbor, block against block, hood against hood. And out of that chaos, the political class steps in with one solution: more policing, more prosecution, more control. The Second Amendment gets invoked loudest when a suburban gun owner faces any perceived restriction. It goes silent when guns are being used to hollow out a community from the inside. It's not a principle. It's policy. And the policy has a target. Now let's talk about the one that most people don't connect to the other two: oil. Here's what you need to understand about oil in the American context. It is not simply an energy source. It is the foundation of the dollar's global dominance. In 1971, Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. The dollar was no longer backed by a physical commodity. So the question became, what backs it? The answer came in 1974 in a deal struck with Saudi Arabia. Oil will be priced globally in US dollars, only dollars. And in exchange, America would guarantee Saudi security with its military. That arrangement, the petrodollar, is why the dollar remained the world's reserve currency after gold was gone. Every nation on earth that needs oil has to hold dollars to buy it. That demand is what gives the dollar its power. Which means any nation that tries to price oil in something other than dollars is not just making an economic decision. They are threatening the entire foundation of American financial dominance. And they get treated accordingly. Venezuela, largest proven oil reserves on earth. Under Chavez, then Maduro, they began moving oil trades outside the dollar framework, deepening ties with China and Russia. The American response? Coups, sanctions, regime change events. The installation of a parallel government under Juan Guaido was sold to you as democracy promotion effort. It was a currency defense operation. Iraq. Saddam Hussein announced in 2000 that Iraq would price its oil in euros. 3 years later, the United States invaded. When U.S. forces secured Baghdad, the first building protected was the oil ministry. Not the hospitals, not the museums, the oil ministry. Libya. Gaddafi was pushing gold-backed African currency, the dinar, that would have allowed African nations to price oil outside the dollar entirely. NATO intervened in 2011. Gaddafi was dead within months. Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, the choke point through which roughly 20% of the world's petroleum passes. Iran began settling oil contracts with Asian buyers in yuan. China moved to price energy at the strait in its own currency. The petrodollar architecture shook. Operation Epic Fury, initiated February 28, 2026, framed as a response to Iran's nuclear program and regional aggression. But if you've been paying attention, you understand that the bombs dropped on Iran are in a very direct and documented sense, dropped in defense of the dollar's right to be the only currency that buys oil. And the families of the people who brokered those arrangements, the Kushners, the Witkoffs, operating in the gap between state action and private financial interest, they don't lose anyone in those strikes. They gain contracts. It's not foreign policy. That's a business model. And oil is the product. Now we get to the one that ties the whole structure together. Drugs. The war on drugs, declared by Nixon in 1971. 50 plus years, over $1 trillion spent. And drugs are more available, more potent, and more profitable today than when the war began. So either the most powerful government on earth is catastrophically incompetent, or it was never really a war on drugs. John Ehrlichman, Nixon's domestic policy chief, key architect of the policy, years later after Watergate, after prison, after he had nothing left to protect, told journalist Dan Baum exactly what it was. Quote, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be against the war or to be black. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings." Unquote. That is the confession, on the record, from the man who built it. Now watch how it connects to money. By 2008, the global illicit drug trade was generating an estimated $350 billion per year in cash. Not credit, not instruments, cash, physical, liquid, always moving. Then the financial crisis hit. Credit markets froze. Interbank lending stopped. The formal banking system, all those towers in Lower Manhattan, was functionally insolvent. The head of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime stated publicly in 2009 that drug money was the only liquid capital available to some banks during the acute phase of the crisis. The shadow economy saved the formal economy. Wachovia Bank processed $378 billion in transactions tied to Mexican cartel cash between 2004 and 2007. Caught. Fined $160 million. No criminal prosecution. No individual banker charged. HSBC laundered money for the Sinaloa cartel. Fine, $1.9 billion. No criminal charges. The DOJ explicitly cited concerns about systemic risk if a major bank faced criminal indictment. So let me translate that. A kid in Compton gets 10 years for one rock. A bank processes hundreds of billions in cartel money, and the government says it's too important to prosecute. That is not a war on drugs. That is a class protection system with drugs as the paperwork. And here's the part that closes the loop back to guns. The drugs didn't flow into urban communities by accident. They came with the firearms. And together they produced exactly what the power structure needed. Chaos deep enough to justify the response they'd already planned. Mass incarceration, prison industrial complex, captive labor market, entire generations removed from voting rolls, from their families, from any capacity to organize. The war on drugs didn't fight the drug trade. It used the drug trade. And the people calling for law and order owned the companies building the cages. So here we are. Guns flooded into communities that needed to be destabilized, restricted the moment those same communities tried to organize, A constitutional right selectively enforced by design. Oil, the invisible hand behind every military intervention in the Middle East and Latin America for the last 50 years. Not about freedom, not about democracy, about who gets to denominate the most important commodity on earth. Drugs, the shadow banking system that props up the formal one when it fails. The political weapon that filled the prisons and the supply chain that was managed, not dismantled, by the very institutions claiming to fight it. God. 3 pillars, 1 structure, 1 class that benefits from it all. And here's the thing they're counting on. That you look at guns and think it's a cultural war issue. That you look at oil and think it's too complicated. That you look at drugs and think it's a poverty issue. They need you to see 3 separate problems. Because the moment you see one system, you stop asking which side of the cultural war you're on, and you start asking who built the war. Watch the pattern. Follow the money. It's just a different grift. Just a different day. I'm Keith, and Keith Speaks. Agree, disagree. Like, comment, absolutely share. It's important that we begin to have these discussions. The conversation is necessary.